We turn to the phone lines right now and find another regular who we're thrilled to have on the program. Wish he was here because he's always a great in-studio guest when he is here from All Elite Wrestling Dynamite, which airs Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. One of the all-time greats from his profession, the fun, the talented, the great Chris Jericho. How are you been, Chris?
Jeez, that was a hell of an intro, Rich.
You know what?
I appreciate that.
That's what happens when I'm quarantined for much of the day, Chris, you know?
I was going to say, you're far meaner when we're in person.
How's life for you? What's going on with you, man?
You know what, man? I'll tell you what. The one thing that I didn't want to do is fall into the every day is Groundhog Day type theory. So I've been still being as creative as I can, still doing a lot of podcasts, doing a lot of press, talking to wonderful people such as yourself.
Thank you, sir.
But the big thing is, as you know, since wrestling is deemed an essential business in Florida,
yes,
we've still been working pretty much every Wednesday. We've been doing a show. So it's been even more unique and interesting for me.
Well, obviously, Chris, when you are part of a match that involves you and Sammy Guevara as La Sex Gods, what's more essential than that, Chris? You know?
Exactly. We're providing hope and fantasy to all everybody watching. I'm going to use that. We provide hope and fantasy.
By the way, yes, you do, Chris. So does some other establishments in the state of Florida. So let's talk about. I mean, that was just set up as a spinning curveball. I mean, I had to hit that one out of the park right there.
Chan-Ho Park to Cal Ripken.
That was a cookie. That was a cookie. For those who may have missed the exploits of La Sex Gods against Matt Harvey and Kenny Omega, walk us through what happened. Chris?
Well, once again, I mean, we're providing entertainment throughout this lockdown, and it's different because we're in the middle of an empty arena, which is very strange because much like a stand-up comedian or a rock and roll show, if you don't have a crowd that's responding to what you're doing, it's very, very strange. So What we've done in AEW is we've placed some of our staff ringside. We work in Daly's Place, which is connected to the stadium in Jacksonville. So there's 3 tiers of this kind of big amphitheater, so we can put people in the 3rd tier, the 2nd tier, and around rings. So if you're doing 10, 12 people around, 30 people all included, it makes some noise. And when I first started wrestling, I wrestled to a lot less than 30 people. So it does give you some ambiance. And also on top of that, rather than just having wrestling match after wrestling match in the ring, we're doing some different stuff. We did a street fight last week where we just went and looked around what was available to us kind of in this concourse of the Jacksonville Jaguars Stadium and put on a pretty fun show. And I think if you're treating it more like a Hollywood stunt fight, like a Hollywood brawl that you would see in a movie, it's much more entertaining than if you're treating it just as a wrestling match, but there's nobody there. And we can see that there's nobody there, so why bother pretending? So I think that's the idea of what we did last week with the crazy street fight and running over each other with golf carts and doing moonsaults off scissor lifts and garbage cans and ice machines and just stuff like that you don't normally see, but it provides a unique atmosphere and it's a lot of fun. Well, very entertaining.
I would ask how you got into the Jacksonville Jaguars Stadium, but we all know who's behind AEW Dynamite, right, on TNT. It's the Khan family, Tony and Shad, the son and father combination that owns the Jacksonville Jaguars. This AEW has been dynamite. It really, really has, Chris. Why do you think it's worked the way it has?
Well, I mean, there's a kind of a combination of factors, Rich. One, we're doing things completely differently from everybody else, any other wrestling company, in that we're letting the guys basically not call their own shots, but we're letting the professionals be professional and be creative. And that's where most of the stuff stands from, is that we're just being creative. And, you got guys with 20, 30 years experience who kind of know what they're doing. So when you kind of have those chains unlocked, it provides a lot more freedom and a lot more fun. 2, we have a very passionate owner in Tony Khan, and Shad as well has been very supportive, but Tony's kind of spearheading it all.
Yeah.
And he knows what he wants, and that's one thing I really appreciate. We have a boss who has passion for the business, has respect for the business, but also knows what he wants and is not swayed by anybody. And then you've got a whole crew of guys and girls who chose not to go anywhere else, who chose to come to AEW and take a chance. And we all kind of consider this our own company because we're the ones that built it. So when you have stake in it and skin in the game, as they say, you have a lot more pride and passion for what you're doing. So if you combine all those things, and also with a great fan base that has followed us from day one and hasn't really left. I mean, we lost a little bit of our audience, but not much. They've been with us the whole way. So it's been a real good kind of culmination of all these factors of people being very passionate on both sides of the camera.
Chris Jericho here on the Rich Eisen Show. Chris, you mentioned how when you started, you would wrestle in front of fewer than 30 people. Walk me through the first Chris Jericho wrestling gig. Walk me through that one, Chris.
October 2nd, 1990, in Ponoka, Alberta, which is a little town in between Calgary and Edmonton.
Yep. At
the Ponoka Moose Hall. Yes, you heard that right, the Moose Hall. And it was just about a mile away from the insane asylum, whatever the politically correct term for that is, which was very apropos of the fact that my first wrestling match was very close to an insane asylum. I worked against Lance Storm, who had a lot of success over the years. We were in wrestling camp together, and we had our first match, which was a 10-minute draw. And it was probably in front of, in my mind, it was 10,000 people. It was probably, 80 or 90. But I just thought it was the greatest thing ever. And I got my paycheck, an envelope that was spelt Jericho wrong, Jerico. And inside was one $20 bill and one $10 bill. And I just thought I won the lottery. Greatest man of my life.
American or Canadian dollars?
Canadian, of course. We're the Ponoka Moose Hall, Rich. They're not paying us in American.
No, I know. I just didn't know if it was for an American outfit that was just, in that hall.
Yeah, no, it was. There was. I didn't even know what American money looked like back in those days. I think the $20 bill was green,
right,
and the $10 bill was purple. So
you got that money, and you're like, I've made it. So when did you hit the big time? When did that happen?
Well, it's interesting because every level that you get to, which is bigger than the last, is the big time. To me, the first time I went to Mexico was the big time, or the first time I went to Japan, et cetera, et cetera. If you're talking about when did I get to the big time in the States, well, that's 96 for WCW with Ted Turner, but I had been in the big time in Mexico working arenas there as early as 1992, and working in arenas and stadiums in Japan, 94, 95. So every level is different from the last. And one thing about a true pro,
yes,
even to this day, is that you always want to get to the next level. You always want to do more. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm still here, is I still have that passion and that fire to continue to create and continue to succeed. And get to that next level of what's the big time for Chris Jericho in 2020.
We're seeing right now The Last Dance. I don't know if you've been watching any of that stuff on ESPN involving Michael Jordan, Chris, and about just the sheer hatred that Jordan still has years later for the Detroit Pistons. You could see it, you could feel it, you could taste it, you could just, it's all over the documentary. Is there anybody that you particularly, truly disliked from back in the day that right now would just get you all seething? Professionally.
It's funny, Chris, is because now that we're home, we're all looking for shows to watch with our families and our wives. And I suggested The Last Dance, and my wife's like, basketball? No way. So I'm going to have to watch that one on my own. But I think that there were guys in the past that I had issues with. Triple H is one of them. He'll tell you the same. In the early 2000s, we didn't have much like for each other, but we always had great matches, and I think this might be one of the reasons why. We just had this professional rivalry, maybe a little bit of a personal dislike. But then, fast forward 4, 5, 6, 7 years, you get to be, a little bit older and wiser, and you think back, like, why did we have so many problems? Why do we hate each other? Why do we not like each other? And then, now we're friends. And I think there's a lot of professional rivalry when you're young and full of vim and vigor, as they say. It happens in rock and roll bands all the time. The bands will break up and 10 years later get back together and wonder, why did we waste 10 years of our lives not playing together? So I think that there's always that little bit of animosity that drives you to become better. And if you have a case like, let's say, Jericho and Triple H, our matches were always great because there was a little bit of real life animosity between us. I'm going to show him. Well, I'm going to show him. Well, I'm going to show him. And I think that's good in a certain way. And I would almost suggest that back in those days that Vince McMahon would subtly encourage that because he knew you're always going to get better results inside of the ring.
Well, I mean, again, The Last Dance is about, those Jordan years. If we could do a 10-part documentary from your world, what I guess 10, 15-year span do you think you'd like to see a documentary on, Chris?
I think probably the best career I ever had. I mean, the first 8 years was good. I think when I turned into kind of the suit and tie, big word using Jericho in 2008 up until now. I mean, that's pretty much there's your 12-year span and add a couple years on the back end. But that's kind of, I think, the highlight of my career, and probably the most interesting part of my career with all the longevity and the chances that I took and the changes that I made. I'm basically changing the business when I signed with AEW. The whole business changed at that point in time. So that's kind of, I think, that'd make a great kind of a story there of a section of a guy's career who always gave his all, but wasn't afraid to take a few chances and ruffle a few feathers along the way.
You the man, Chris Jericho. You hang in there. You stay safe, and we'll just keep following you on Twitter at @IamJericho, and then on Instagram at Chris Jericho Fozzy for your heavy metal band, Fozzy.
Yes, sir, Rich, and I look forward to seeing you in the future in person. And tell Nick Swartzen that I want to hear him tell you a fart joke.
Okay, let me write that down. A fart joke, right?
He was bragging about it earlier, how his fart jokes are the best.
Okay, you got it. Chris, I aim to please. Thanks for calling in. You take care of yourself.
You aim to please. Thanks, Rich.
You got it. That's Chris Jericho.